I walked into the office, my heart pounding as I saw him standing there, just a few feet away. His assistant beside him, the same woman he had left me for. The betrayal still stung, but I wasn't going to let it show. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and walked toward my new desk. Today, I wasn't the wife who had been cast aside. I was his boss. My promotion, hard-earned and long-awaited, had brought me to this moment. I had worked for this power, this control. Now, as I looked at him, I realized I could finally set the terms of the game, and he was no longer in charge. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. It was the phone call I never expected, the one that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. The day my world crumbled began like any other, a morning filled with routine, coffee, and the quiet hum of a life that felt secure. But when I picked up the phone, everything changed. "He's gone," my best friend Sarah said softly, her voice tinged with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "He's left you." For her. At first, I didn't understand. My mind, muddled by disbelief, couldn't process what she was saying. My husband, the man I had spent 30 years of my life with, had left me for someone else. The assistant. The woman who had worked alongside him for years, the one I'd trusted without question, had become the one who took my place. I couldn't breathe. The air seemed to leave my lungs, and the walls around me closed in. The room felt too small, my skin too tight. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a hollow gasp. For a moment, I thought I might faint, but I steadied myself against the kitchen counter, trying to hold on to the one thing that hadn't been ripped away from me, my composure. "How?" I finally managed to whisper, though I wasn't sure if I was asking Sarah or myself. "I don't know the details," she replied. "But I think you should talk to him." Talk to him. After 30 years of marriage, after all the sacrifices, the compromises, the loyalty, he was just gone? I couldn't wrap my head around it. The man I had built a life with, the man who had promised to love me through thick and thin, was now with someone else. Someone younger, more vibrant, and, judging by the whispers and rumors, someone more ambitious. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. My eyes burned, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. But even in the chaos of emotion, there was one thought that kept repeating in my mind. This can't be real. This can't be happening to me. I thought of all the years I had dedicated to this relationship. The late nights when I stayed up waiting for him to come home after long hours at the office. The holidays I sacrificed so we could attend business events. The moments I'd put my own needs aside because his career was my priority, because his success meant security for us. I was loyal. I was devoted. And this betrayal, was not something I had ever seen coming. I remembered how he'd always told me how important I was to him, how we had built a life together. But now, all of that felt like empty words. They meant nothing. He meant nothing. I stood there in my kitchen, feeling like a stranger in my own home. How could I have missed this? How could I have been so blind? I had trusted him completely, and now I was left with nothing but the shattering reality that he had chosen her over me. The anger came next. A hot, fierce tide that surged from deep within me. How dare he? How dare he betray me like this? The years of partnership, of shared memories, of building a family together, all of it felt like it had been thrown away in an instant. I tried to call him. His number went straight to voicemail. I left a message, but I knew it was pointless. There was nothing he could say that would make this right. The hurt was overwhelming, but beneath it, a small part of me knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let this happen to me. Not like this. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands still trembling, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to cry. This wasn't just about him leaving me. It was about everything I had given up for this life, for this marriage, and how it all meant nothing now. But as the tears fell, something inside me began to shift. I was angry, yes, But there was something else too, something deeper. A sense of resolve. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let him walk away and leave me broken. He had made his choice, and now, it was time for me to make mine. I never imagined that the man I had spent my entire life with, the man I had trusted beyond reason, would betray me in such a heart-wrenching way. The shock of the phone call still hadn't settled in as I sat in the empty quiet of my home, the weight of the betrayal sinking in, heavy and suffocating. But as much as it hurt, I knew that the story of how I had arrived here didn't start in the cold silence of my living room. It started years ago, in a life I thought was filled with security, love, and purpose. James and I had met when we were both young, just starting out in our careers. I was in my mid-20s, fresh out of college, eager to make my mark in the world. He was everything I had ever dreamed of, handsome, intelligent, and driven. He had a way about him that made everyone around him feel important, like they mattered. And, of course, I wanted to matter to him. It didn't take long for me to fall in love with him. The first few years of our relationship were exhilarating. We'd stay up late talking about our dreams, our aspirations. We shared ambitions, both personal and professional, and our goals felt aligned. There was a sense of partnership from the very start. I remember the way he would look at me with such intensity, like we were in this together, like we were building something that no one could break. When we decided to get married, I thought I was making the best decision of my life. We were a perfect match in my eyes, and I never questioned our bond. I believed in it with every fiber of my being. I wasn't just in love with James. I was proud of the life we were building together. We bought a house, established routines, and set out to create a family. But over time, things began to shift. At first, it was subtle, small moments where I would find myself putting my own needs aside for him. He was busy at work, climbing the corporate ladder at the company he had joined right after we married. His success was my success, or so I told myself. I took on the role of being the supportive wife, the one who held down the home front. He would come home late from meetings, and I would always be there with a warm meal and a listening ear. I supported his dreams, his goals. I believed that if I stayed behind him, he would come to see just how much I sacrificed for him. And I did sacrifice. I put my own career on hold to support his. The company I had worked for, the job I had once loved, became a distant memory as I poured all my energy into making sure everything at home was perfect for him. The kids, the house, our social life, it was all part of the equation. When we decided to have children, I was the one who took on the responsibility of raising them, managing the household, and keeping everything in place. I was proud of the life we had built together. I was his partner, his equal. But slowly, as the years passed, I began to lose myself. The sacrifices I made started to feel less like choices and more like expectations. I didn't pursue my own passions anymore. My friends noticed, though they never said anything. I became more and more wrapped up in James' world, and my own identity faded into the background. It wasn't that I didn't love being a mother, a wife, but somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was outside of those roles. I stopped dreaming for myself. My life became about us, about the family, about his career, about maintaining the image of the perfect life. And James. He was always there, but he wasn't really there. He worked long hours, traveled often, and in his pursuit of success, became more distant from me. I didn't notice at first. I made excuses. He's stressed. He's busy. He'll come around. But the distance between us grew. And with each passing year, I became more and more accustomed to the idea of him being absent. I couldn't even remember the last time we had gone on a vacation without work looming over us. Our conversations had dwindled to the surface-level exchanges of two people living separate lives under the same roof. The passion that had once been so vibrant between us seemed to have died a slow death, swallowed by the busyness of life. I stopped complaining. I told myself I was lucky to have a husband who provided for our family, and I pushed down the feelings of loneliness. And then came her. I hadn't thought much of the assistant at first. She was young, driven, confident, and unlike me, had the energy and ambition to make things happen. She was always in the office, always by his side, working alongside him in ways that I had once done. I had seen how close they had become, but I told myself it was all professional. He would never cross that line. He was too loyal, too devoted to us. I had trusted him implicitly, and in the back of my mind, I believed I was still the woman he loved, the woman who had been with him through everything. But slowly, I began to notice things I hadn't before. Little changes in the way he spoke about her, how he seemed to look for excuses to bring her up in conversation. The late nights at the office were becoming more frequent, and when he came home, his mind was always elsewhere. I told myself I was imagining things. I wanted to believe it. But when I found out, when Sarah called me that night, I realized just how blind I had been. All of my sacrifices, all of the years I had devoted to this family, to James, were nothing more than stepping stones for him to walk away. He had found someone else. Someone younger. Someone more ambitious. Someone who had everything I had given up. I wish I could say I was angry the moment I found out. But I wasn't. I was devastated. I felt as though the world I had built with James had been a lie. The love, the partnership, the sacrifices, all of it seemed to have been worthless. And worse still, I felt completely invisible. How could he do this to me? How could he throw everything away? The betrayal was more than just the affair. It was the years of trust, the years of loyalty, the years I had spent putting him before everything else. And now, I was left with nothing but the cold sting of his absence. The moment I found the text messages was the moment everything changed. I had always trusted James, perhaps too much. After 30 years of marriage, the idea that he would betray me felt impossible. Our bond had been so strong, so intertwined. I believed we were unbreakable. But all that certainty crumbled the night I stumbled upon the evidence. The phone in the living room, left carelessly on the coffee table as if it were just another object in the house. I had been cleaning up after dinner, my mind preoccupied with thoughts of the children, our upcoming plans, the usual hum of daily life. I had no reason to suspect anything was wrong, but something tugged at me, something small, barely noticeable, but undeniable. As I walked by, I saw his phone there. It was unlocked, and without thinking, I picked it up. I don't know what made me open the messages. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. But as soon as I unlocked the screen, I knew I had crossed a line. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to see. The first text was from her. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I've missed you." I felt my stomach twist. I didn't need to read any more, but I couldn't stop. I scrolled through the conversations, one message after another, each one more intimate than the last. The words they shared weren't just casual exchanges. They were filled with affection, longing, and desire. "I can't stop thinking about you. I can't wait to be with you." I felt sick. My hands began to shake as I dropped the phone back onto the table. My body trembled with disbelief, and for a moment, I could barely breathe. The air around me seemed to thin as the reality of what I was seeing settled in. He had been with her. All these months, all these late nights at the office, all the times he told me he was busy, he was with her. She had been right there, taking everything I had worked so hard to build. The rage didn't come immediately. At first, there was nothing but a deep, hollow ache. I was numb. The woman I had once considered a colleague, someone I trusted, had taken my place in his life. And James, who had always been my rock, had betrayed me in the most fundamental way. How could he do this to me? How could he turn our life together into something so insignificant? I sank down onto the couch, clutching my chest, trying to steady my breathing. It was as though the world had flipped upside down, and I was powerless to stop it. I felt small, insignificant, and utterly alone. The woman who had shared my home, who had been the second most important person in James's life, was now the one who had taken his heart. And I was left in the wreckage, trying to hold on to something, anything that could keep me grounded. After a long moment, the anger began to seep in, slowly at first, then building into a quiet storm. I had been so blind, so willing to excuse him. I had spent years making excuses for his absence, for the distance between us, but now I could see it all so clearly. It had been there, hidden in plain sight, all along. I was the fool who had ignored the signs, too wrapped up in keeping up appearances, too focused on making sure everything looked perfect on the outside. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling as I scrolled through his contact list, my mind racing with what I needed to do. I had to confront him. I had to hear it from him, even though I knew deep down that there was nothing he could say to make this right. I dialed his number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. And then the voicemail clicked on. "James," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know about you and her. Don't bother coming home. Don't even bother trying to explain. I don't want to hear it." I hung up before I could say more. What was the point? What could he possibly say that would make any of this better? The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything we had built together. The years of loyalty, of trust, of shared memories, all reduced to nothing. He had chosen her. He had chosen someone else over the life we had made. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, staring at nothing in particular. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own shallow breaths. My mind raced through a million different scenarios, each one darker than the last. How could I have missed this? How could I have been so blind? All of the signs were there, but I had ignored them, telling myself that everything was fine. But nothing was fine. And now, I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I thought I understood. I couldn't stay in the house. I couldn't bear the thought of him coming home, of having to face him, to look into his eyes and hear him try to justify this. I grabbed my coat and headed out into the night, not caring where I went, just needing to get away. I needed to think. I needed to clear my head. The hurt was overwhelming, but the anger was starting to take over. I drove aimlessly, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Where was I going? What was I doing? I had no plan, no direction, just a desperate need to escape the suffocating pain that seemed to follow me everywhere I went. As I drove, my thoughts began to shift. I realized something. This wasn't just about him. This wasn't just about the affair. This was about me. About who I had become over the years. I had given everything to him, to us, and in return, I had been left with nothing. But I was not going to let this be the end. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. The anger, the hurt, it was all still there, swirling in my chest. But beneath it, something else was beginning to take shape. A feeling I hadn't had in years. A sense of power. Of control. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. The drive that night felt like it lasted forever. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, all conflicting and overwhelming. I was still reeling from the discovery of the affair, from the heartache that had crept in when I saw those messages. But now, in the silence of the car, as I drove without direction, something else began to emerge, a quiet determination. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. I wasn't going to let him, or her, dictate my future. For the first time in years, I realized I had control over my life again. Maybe I had lost control of our marriage, but I hadn't lost control of me. When I returned home later that night, I didn't know what to expect. James's car was still in the driveway. My heart clenched in my chest as I approached the front door, unsure of how I'd react to seeing him again. Would I be angry? Would I scream? Or would I collapse under the weight of everything that had just happened? I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. He was sitting on the couch, the same way he always did after a long day. Slumped, tired, his shoes left carelessly by the door. But tonight was different. Tonight, there was no comfort in his presence, no familiar sense of peace. He looked up when he heard me enter, but his expression faltered when he saw my face. There was no trace of apology, no attempt at reconciling. He knew. "Emma," he began, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "We need to talk." I didn't want to talk. I didn't need to hear any more excuses or lies. Instead, I took a moment to collect myself, to let the last remnants of my shock fade away. I was no longer the woman who needed him. I had spent too many years convincing myself that I was nothing without him. But the truth was, I had been me long before I ever met him, and I would be me long after he left. "I don't need to hear it, James," I said, my voice steady, though it felt foreign to me. "I know everything. I know about you and her." His face twisted, as if the weight of his guilt finally reached him. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, stopping him. "No more lies," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You've made your choice. And I'm not going to sit here and let you destroy everything I've worked for just because you want something new." He stood up, his movements stiff, almost defensive. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Emma. It wasn't supposed to go this far." I looked at him, incredulous. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? You left me for her, James. You didn't just fall into this by accident. You made a choice." He ran his hand through his hair, his frustration growing. "I never wanted to hurt you." "You did," I shot back. "You hurt me more than you'll ever understand. But I'm done. I'm done being hurt. I'm done with your excuses." I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the momentary uncertainty. For years, I had been the one to clean up his messes, to forgive him, to make everything right. But not anymore. This time, I wasn't going to forgive him. Not because I was being spiteful, but because I needed to stop allowing myself to be treated as though I was less than I truly was. I turned and walked toward the stairs, my heart pounding, but not in fear. There was no fear left in me. I was angry, yes. I was hurt, deeply. But I was also clear-headed. I had to do what was right for me, even if it meant walking away from the life I had known for so long. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but replay the events of the day over and over in my mind. But as the hours passed, my anger shifted to something else. Something colder. Something more focused. I was no longer just the betrayed wife. I was Emma, the woman who was going to take back control. I had spent 30 years supporting him, standing by his side, building a life that was supposed to be ours. And now it was time for me to reclaim everything I had lost, not just in my marriage, but in myself. The following days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and decisions I never thought I would have to make. But as I dove into the practicalities of what my next steps would be, I found something unexpected inside myself. Confidence. Confidence that I had buried deep for years, beneath layers of compromise and quiet resentment. I began by securing legal advice. I contacted a lawyer to discuss my options. Divorce. It was a word I had never thought I'd utter, but it was a word I had to accept now. It was a hard decision, but I knew it was the right one. James had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. And then, there was the business. The company where James had spent the last decade climbing the corporate ladder had always been a part of our lives. He had worked late nights there, telling me that the company's success would benefit us both. I had believed him. I had supported him in every way I could, even when I knew deep down that something wasn't right. But the company wasn't just his, it was mine too. And I had a seat at that table. I had every right to take control of what was mine. Over the next few weeks, I dove headfirst into the business side of things. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the only way forward. I began to explore every opportunity, every avenue, that would allow me to assert my presence and my power. The legal team, the finance team, the executives, they all began to see me as more than just James's wife. I was Emma, and I was here to make my mark. Then came the turning point, the moment I realized I truly had the upper hand. As I sat in a meeting with the board, discussing the future of the company, I noticed James sitting at the back of the room. His face was tense, his body language defensive. He had no idea what was coming. When the time came for decisions to be made, I made mine clear. The future of the company was going to take a new direction, and I was going to be the one in charge. It was time for me to step into the role I had been denied for so long. And just like that, the balance of power had shifted. The woman who had once been betrayed, who had been left behind, was now in control. I wasn't just the wife anymore. I was the one making decisions. I was the one leading the way. The days following my decision to take control were filled with a quiet intensity. I could feel the weight of my choices settling on my shoulders, but it wasn't a burden. It was a challenge I was ready to face. I had spent years letting my identity be shaped by James, by the life we had built together. But now, I was shaping my own future. No longer defined by my role as his wife, I was becoming the woman I had always been beneath the surface. The woman who had a voice, a purpose, and a future that was hers alone to craft. James had been furious when he learned that I had initiated the divorce proceedings. His arrogance, once so apparent in our marriage, had begun to crumble under the pressure of my newfound resolve. He tried to apologize, to claim he had made a mistake, but it was too late. The truth had come out, and there was no going back. He had made his choice, and now I was making mine. I didn't give him the satisfaction of confronting him again. There was no need for any more discussions, no more attempts to salvage something that had already been lost. Every word I had once held inside, every moment of doubt I had buried beneath the surface, now fueled my every action. I realized just how much I had sacrificed over the years, how I had allowed myself to disappear into his shadow. But no more. The day the divorce was finalized was the day I truly felt free. I signed the papers with a steady hand, no hesitation. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for myself. The woman who had been so devoted, so loyal, was now stepping into a new chapter, one where she would no longer be defined by her past. With the divorce behind me, I focused on what I could control: my career. The company I had once only thought of as James's was now mine to navigate. It wasn't just about gaining power. It was about taking back what was rightfully mine. The role of CEO had always been a distant dream, something I had never dared to consider when I was married to him. But now, as I stood before the boardroom, speaking with authority, I realized that I had always been capable of this. I had just never allowed myself to see it before. The first few months were a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and adjustments. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned my ability to lead, but those moments were fleeting. I had walked through the fire of betrayal and come out the other side stronger. The doubts faded as I saw the respect in the eyes of my colleagues, the trust they placed in me as a leader. I wasn't just his ex-wife anymore. I was Emma, and I had earned every bit of this position. James tried to undermine me, of course. He couldn't help himself. He had always been the one in control, and the idea of me surpassing him was a blow to his ego that he wasn't willing to accept. But no matter what he tried, no matter how many attempts he made to discredit me, I stood firm. I knew I wasn't just fighting for my place at the table. I was fighting for the woman I had become, a woman who wouldn't let herself be pushed aside, a woman who knew her worth. And then, it happened. The moment I had been waiting for, though I hadn't realized I was waiting for it until it was in front of me. It was the company's annual meeting, where the future of the business was on the line. James had assumed he would still be the one calling the shots, that he could come in, offer his ideas, and somehow undermine my leadership. But that day, he made a critical mistake. He underestimated me. During the meeting, he tried to present a proposal that, if approved, would have handed him more power in the company, something he had been working on in the background. But when it was my turn to speak, I took control of the room. I laid out my vision for the company, the future I had planned, and the direction I wanted us to take. My voice was steady, confident, and clear. When I finished, there was silence. The board members looked at each other, nodding in agreement. Then, one by one, they voted in favor of my plan. James's proposal? Rejected. His eyes were filled with disbelief, but for the first time in our marriage, I felt no sympathy. He had lost. He had lost not just the company, but me, his respect, his trust, his place in my life. I had taken control of the narrative, and in doing so, I had redefined my own future. As the meeting ended, I walked out of the boardroom, my head held high. The weight I had been carrying for years, fear, guilt, insecurity, was gone. I was no longer the woman defined by someone else's decisions. I was my own woman. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of who I had become. As I stood by the window in my new office, looking out over the city that had once felt so distant and out of reach, I realized something profound. The betrayal, the pain, the heartache, they hadn't broken me. They had forged me into someone new, someone stronger, someone who could stand on her own 2 feet and face the world without fear. I wasn't defined by the man I had loved. I wasn't defined by the betrayal that nearly destroyed me. I was defined by the woman I had become, independent, empowered, and ready to take on whatever came next. The road ahead wasn't easy, but I knew now that I had the strength to walk it alone. And for the first time in years, I felt free.